Well, this whole, just jumping off what Kathy's talking about public education, and New York should say, yes, it costs a fortune to live here, and your kid can get this education, but then this other paper talking about the crisis. Because we were talking earlier when I came, we were talking about my kids, I was talking about how, and the sciences in particular, how competition, fear, which I think is a result of this big 30, 35-year experiment of this privatization becoming very popular, because it really is turning into the survival of the fittest in a way, and it's sort of like, hey, if you're successful, good for you, wonderful, America, the land of the great, and if you're not, too bad, sorry that didn't work out for you. So of course the interesting thing about it here in the city of New York is the people who come here, it costs a fortune for them to live here, make a fortune in money, are not interested in sending their kids to CUNY. Because there's a whole class issue.
Although that has changed.
Yeah, it is changing. It is changing. You're seeing, I even see in my class more middle class kids, but I didn't want to get off on, do you want to jump in? I didn't want to get off on that.
Kevin, go ahead.
Well, I think that, they would like you to perceive it as, it's survival of the fittest, but it's actually survival of the best prepared. And so, the number one indicator of whether or not you'll graduate college is how well prepared you were going into it. And our kids, or kids who are educated in the city of New York, are often less prepared than kids that come from suburban schools. And I think it's important to measure what you value and to value what you measure. And we need to, I think CUNY does a relatively poor job of explaining the lift that CUNY students get when they by the time they graduate. And I think that there's an emphasis on trying to compete too early with other top research universities, when in fact there's a lot of remediation for skills that need to be done.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I was thinking along the same way, like K through 12, it's one of the most segregated, there are K through 12 systems in the country, and there have been some great articles. I think it was a good, powerful Atlantic piece a year ago or so. Right, these are the students who are the least prepared, they're the ones going to the community colleges, and they're the ones not graduating, right? Some of our schools are doing better, definitely, than the national average, but all of these remedial needs hold students back, and it's wholly, almost totally dependent on that. And I was having a discussion with someone the other day, right, these aren't the students who, it's not about sort of ambition and intelligence, it's about what they know coming in. So that's the separating part and the preparedness there.
Economic lines quite clearly.
Right.
There was a long piece about this in the Chronicle last week, that the single most important determinant of whether you graduate from college is income level. It's just another way of saying what you said about levels of preparation, that as much as we are focused on meritocratic education as the additive to upward mobility, increasingly so, that ladder is skewed, the playing field is not level at all, toward those who have resources. And to some extent, it's the kids who win the year-round lottery, and who your parents are. But even more distressingly, it's questions about income and income disparity. And as more and more students enroll in public institutions, 82% the number now, 1900 the number was 20%, and a huge kick forward, first with the baby boom and then after 2008. And as the cost of privates continues to escalate, those folks are going to be fine. But if you look at that 82% who are attending public universities where you expect the playing field to be level, it's not. It's not level for someone who attends a flagship as opposed to a branch campus. It's not level for students at the University of California who are admitted but told they have to do distance learning for a year so that there's space to admit out-of-state students who can, in fact, pay out-of-state tuition. The same kind of competition, snappier dorms, more amenities, better food halls, at publics as they become more and more private. So the notion that part of the function of public higher education was to create that level playing field to obviate the kinds of disparities that you're speaking about, are also beginning to disappear as publics become more private and need to fund a greater percentage of their costs through traditionally private means, through tuition, which continues to escalate, through questions about sponsored research and the capacities there for commercialization, for a variety of tech transfer questions, most significantly for philanthropy, and all of the strings that come with the acquisition of money. And when you look at it, the point that you make, the two of you make actually, is the thing that leaps off the page. That if you come from, the higher you are in the income total, the more likely you are to graduate. How do we begin to turn some of that around? It's the proposition that CUNY has been committed to since 1837. You know, it was, if you read that document, Townsend Harris, it was defined as an experiment. And you know, it's far from politically correct. I mean, what we talk about is the mission to educate the children of the whole people, but if you read the whole document, it says this is an experiment to see whether you're eligible for that, whether or not you're going to a public university. So that if you're going to go to Cornell or you're going to go to St. Rose of Albany, you're still eligible for state support, which is not true in most states where those dollars flow into, or don't flow into public higher education. But it drives privates to become more like publics that compete for government grants. They lobby aggressively. I mean, New York has a huge lobbying effort driven by independent colleges and universities within the state. So you wind up with this chiasmatic move in which publics become privates, privates become publics. And what's at stake is pretty much everything. I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer to your question. Yes.
Well, I was just in New Orleans and Baton Rouge for the last 5 days, and it was astonishing to me.
Is it going?
Yes, it was fabulous. My family lives down there, so I was visiting family. But I'm hearing all of the things that are happening with K-12 and higher education down there, charter schools, and also major budget cutting measures that are going on with state institutions like LSU, Louisiana State University. They're having to slash the budget, and the governor has to make up for $1 billion in his budget. And so they're laying off employees at Louisiana State University. They're firing faculty, are laying off faculty, have suspended all new hiring, and cutting programs. And it's just astonishing what the state is going through with education. But with LSU, that's higher education. But also with K-12, they have, since Katrina and New Orleans, they have completely changed the whole education spectrum. And it's all become a lot of charter schools as opposed to public schools. So
it becomes again the public-private conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
The charters have private funding, but they also now have public funding, and those dollars have to come from somewhere, and that's clearly an issue. I think it's, we spend a lot of time, at least within the halls of various CUNY institutions, worried about our funding and correctly pointing to limits and challenges that we front. But the more you move out into the country, I think last week I was talking about having come back from Arizona and the slashes there. This is not a small matter, and it's not a local matter, and this isn't just Albany or City Hall. This is a huge national issue, and I think what's at stake is again, I began that little talk by talking about, I don't like hyperbole and trying to respect language and avoid its inflation. But I genuinely believe that the future of the country, we live in a knowledge economy, we live in an innovation economy, and the challenge is that, with the exception of a handful of super rich privates, 20 to 30 usual suspects, the challenge across the spectrum is huge, and it has strong connections to privatization, neoliberalism, whatever the hell you want to call it. But it says that the acquisition of a college degree and the knowledge that comes with it are private goods, that you make an investment. Maybe we will help you if you are at this tier of the economic ladder, and that tier keeps getting smaller and the help diminishes, maybe we will do that. But this is something that's in your interest. Therefore, it is on you to borrow the money or to make the investment, and whatever you gain from it is yours. I mean, certainly it cuts into any sense of public spiritedness, and part of, I think, what we're all trying to do is to make students aware that they are making a commitment in voluntarily pursuing higher education. But more to the point, aware that what they are doing has consequence for all of us, and that it is not some idealistic argument we are making, it's a desperate argument about self-interest. If the economy of the state, if the economy of the nation, if the well-being, if any sense of polity, public square matters, then this is the kind of investment that this country has made since the mid-19th century with the land grants and the Morrill Acts that has paid huge, huge dividends. We didn't get to this point of this stellar higher education system because of private investment. It's a reason, I mean, there are lots of reasons why people wave their hands about the crisis in the humanities, but people are driven to professional, career-driven opportunities, even though employers will tell you that's not the skill set they're looking for. Because it is an investment, and that investment should pay off. My parents are doing this. I borrowed all of this money. I need to be able to pay it back quickly, and I need a job that's going to cash it. I mean, we hear that from our students, I'm sure, over and over again. And you spent a lot of breath and air explaining the fallacy of that position. But that's part of this consequence of moving toward a perception of education. And you're right, Janie, it goes K-12 and it's part of charters, and that's a complicated question that can spin in 19 different ways. But it's all part of the same argument, which is to say public investment is no longer a consequence. In the same way that we don't invest in infrastructure, although at least we argue about that. As the population becomes older, as the priorities of the nation begin to change, I think unwisely so, then the issue that was so easy to argue in 1955 or 1960 becomes harder because everybody's thinking about private interest rather than the larger good. And forget about what research does in order to sustain the planet. I mean, if we're all going to be able to breathe, think about the most basic of level. How does your economy function if you don't have a workforce capable of managing it? And Kathy knows way more about this than I do, but in the conversations I've had with people in corporations and industry, these are not people who miss the point, who continue to say that the skills acquired in a liberal arts education are really what you need: flexibility, be able to do 7 different jobs in your lifetime, whatever. But the message hasn't really made its way through because on the other side of the argument, security, healthcare, issues for an aging population, all of tax relief, all short-term issues. And that's part of the challenge we have 2 challenges. One, to make that argument, and at the same time to deal with the circumstances we have to ensure that what happens in our classrooms and our institutions is as responsive to that challenge as we can make it. And I'll shut up.
Oh my gosh. That's great.
I just believe this stuff is so important that I realize I'm preaching to the choir here, but so be it.
I just want to throw on a practical level, one of the reasons I'm back in school is I ran a business for 15 years, a music business, in northern Manhattan that has never come back since the collapse of 2008. And I would say the number one, there were several contributors, but I'd say a major contributor is that the young people who would be the clientele at the studio would be in their 20s and early 30s, and it's the student debt crisis that has basically crippled them and kept them from being able to participate in all sorts of activities that they would be able to normally. But the number one thing that I heard over and over was, I have $75,000 in student loan debt. I have $100,000 in student loan debt.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, that piece in Education Life this week about George Washington and Steve Trachtenberg. You've got all of them. Again, they, like the Ivory Tower, you pick this exceptional student who has 6-figure debt, and then 18 paragraphs later, they tell you that the average debt is $26,000 or whatever. It's significant without any question. But the message then becomes, you really can't afford to do things that aren't going to be lucrative because there is this. It's not to say it's not a real problem. It is to say that it has become so pumped up that both parents and students, and increasingly universities who are in a very competitive market for a shortage of students, make that case that, you need this, we are going to give you this kind of training that will get you a job.
Right. But I think that, well, carrying that student debt burden is not an easy thing, and we also have to look at the fact, 20% of student loans are in default, right? Student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy.
That's correct.
And so, the idea that you could have a debt that follows you, no matter how minimal your assets become, you can't ever get rid of it. So we
25
do.
years.
Okay, but
It's still your lifetime. It's your
You know,
functional lifetime.
So it does provide a very powerful curb on people's willingness to be adventurous.
course.
And I think, that as a nation, we really have to decide whether, 20% of the companies that Mitt Romney invested in went bankrupt. He was able to discharge hundreds of millions of dollars worth of debt that never affected his personal fortune. And why we need to haunt a music major for 25 years is a little.
It's appalling. It's really
Sean fell
terrible.
short.
The version of police, yeah. So that's partly what this class is about, is being spokespeople for thinking about education and helping our students even to think very seriously about what education is and why it's important in any field, and to really think through what they contribute and what they contribute by being students right now, and why that's important. Maria, you had your hand up earlier.
Actually, I kind of covered, but another point I want to touch on, I actually watched your podcast, which was quite interesting. I'm not too sure if everyone watched it. It's similar to your article also, where you encourage students to take responsibility for their own education and stuff like that. But the thing that really popped out to me was the gorilla test. I actually took that test unbeknownst to me, and I actually failed it. I fell into the 65% who actually failed the test at that time. And I was so surprised, I was so intrigued by this test, so I called my niece and I said, I'm sure she's going to fail it because, she's so focused like I am. Right? And she said, why is that gorilla crossing
So she probably had her iPhone open while she was watching it and wasn't really paying attention to the screen?
No, actually it was on the computer. It was like, not the iPhone, it was like a desktop computer. And I said, make sure, just count how many times, the people in Bible pass the ball to each other and stuff like that. And I said, let me hear you count, and she was counting, and it just happens like, why is there a gorilla walking across? It's an educational context.
Right.
But if you take that outside in terms of multitasking, how would you explain that to people in terms of cell phones and increased accidents and stuff like that? But another thing I want to go back to with the educational aspect in terms of the gorilla test and stuff like that. As educators ourselves, we are so focused on our tasks, we are so focused on certain things that we want to achieve in the classroom that we kind of miss other things that are happening around us. And I have been one of them. So I'm very conscious. I do engage in reflective practice that helps me a lot. I make notes and stuff like that because I used to tend to miss a lot of these things, and the gorilla test proved it because, sometimes I get so focused, I would miss Johnny over there in the corners, just struggling and stuff like that. So I thought it was really a good connection to your essay that you wrote.
She was a good interviewer. She did a very nice job of asking the right question at the right time, which turns out to be an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, you really can see who a good or a bad interviewer is very quickly. Just to sort of do a little run through that, one, I'm so happy one of the groups is looking at life issues and ethics as well, because that's exactly taking the focus on what we do as educators and looking at into a larger context, no matter whether you're teaching pre-chemistry or introduction to narrative or music or history or audiology or all the amazing things you're teaching, thinking about those life issues and what the impact is. It's not only good for you as a teacher, but good for your students. We know that. Relevance is one of those things that improves retention, applicability, likelihood that someone's going to finish a course. If somebody thinks this is going to help me in my life, I'm not just doing this for some cynical, like someone's requiring this. There's a reason for why I'm doing it. That's a great thing. So I'm really happy that's one of our topics that we're going to be looking at in depth. Brain doesn't know how to monotask. There's just no such thing as monotasking. So for me, well, you know, my favorite example is like there's only been one Buddha, right? The whole point of the 5,000-year tradition of meditation is you take away all distractions, right? You sit quietly in a room. There's nothing to make your mind wander. And that's exactly when your mind goes crazy, right? Right? If you've ever had insomnia, duh, right? You know, that's what you know that's the case too. You know, it's very, very, very hard to stay focused, except for some activities that are incredibly focused, that require full concentration. Video game playing happens to be one of those that they've measured, that when you're fully immersed in video games, a truck could drive through and you would not know. I mean, not forget the gorilla. The gorilla could be chomping on your ear and you probably wouldn't know it if you're a video game player. The point of the video game, for me, the point of the gorilla test, and the person who invented the test back in the 70s, Ulrich Nieser agrees with me. His students who did it more famously in a recent time don't, which is interesting because it's a different kind of training. It's a different. He did the gorilla test to show that we're always missing something. His students are much more interested in how you focus attention on something so you don't miss anything, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So I often get in debates, and I like them both very much, but I often get in debates with them about what that experiment means. For me, it means you always need somebody counting the basketballs, because that's important. And you need someone watching out for gorillas, right? That since you can't do everything all at once, and you need focus, right? There are things in life that absolutely demand focus. But you have to know whenever you're focusing on one thing, there's so much you're missing. And the thing I always say is that heartache and heartburn are far more distracting than, and that's why the group that's dealing with life issues is, so that's the connection to life issues. Heartache and heartburn are far more distracting than your email. So in other words, if you're sending a kid to school hungry, you're not going to teach that kid anything, except that he lives in a world where there's other people who have food and he doesn't. You know, I mean, you know, there's just, you have to make sure that those basic things are taken care of. If somebody's in a situation of misery, I did a number of interviews when I wrote Now You See It that never got into the book, but one of my favorite, I interviewed magicians, for example, which my editor cut, even though it's still the title that wasn't my title, it was my editor's title, but that's a different issue. But magicians are great. Magicians know everything about how to fool you with attention and how to make you really pay attention so that suddenly the elephant appears to the side. I mean, you know, it's all about focus and how to trick us with focus. My favorite was insurance adjusters. And what I heard over and over, I interviewed about 15 insurance adjusters, and what the narrative, the story they would tell over and over again is somebody comes to them and says, you know, it was just a bad day. I left divorce court, I got screwed, and then this idiot hit me from behind. And what all the insurance adjusters know is if you put that in the narrative, no one gets their money from their insurance. But it's not that we cause our own accidents, it's just we have a different level of attention when we have something weighing on us. There's whole populations in this country that never live without things weighing on them. You know, how in the world could you possibly succeed in school or anywhere else